Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to the second edition of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And I am absolutely buzzed to have Shane on today because, yeah, he was the first person ever to get me into podcasting and have me on his. And yeah, I've been obsessed ever since. And so, yeah, if this is good or bad, you can blame it on him. And what you wouldn't have known, but I'll let you into a little secret, is prior to us coming on today, Shane has given me some expert audio training. So yeah, we cut that bit out. So yeah, so I'm going to share my screen as normal, and then we'll get cracking, and we can
Awesome.
learn a bit more about the man and the. Should we do the whole man myth legend thing?
Oh no, please
That
don't.
seems like a nice
Thanks,
thing to
Chris.
start
Wow,
with.
look at that.
Here we go. And so great. So yeah, so we're here with Shane. As you can see here, he is an organizational coach. He's the co-founder of Work Collaboratively. He's the host of the Education Leaders podcast, and we're gonna yeah, get straight into this by learning a bit more about him. So let's start with this. What do you do, Shane?
Oh gosh. Do you know, Chris, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's such a privilege. And yeah, as you say, like you've been on my podcast, Chris, and I'm very used to being sat in your chair. So this is like really thrusting me into kind of my uncomfortable zone, which is really great. And what a delight. So yeah, what do I do? So I'm based in Shanghai in China, been in international education for quite a while now, most of my education career. And currently, I work as an organizational coach with predominantly international schools, but also education organizations and outfits around the world. So, what does that mean? It means I'm in the space of leadership development. It means I'm in the space of organizational change and strategy. And I really support schools with kind of strategic vision, with um, planning out good quality professional development, for example, and for leading, sustainable change.
Yeah,
And that's kind of like what most of my time is taken up. And that's why, with leadership, I also have my own podcast as well for education leaders, which as you all know, like doing your own podcast is such a delight because you just get to chat and geek out on all the kind of good stuff that you love.
yeah. Well, I remember you saying to me how bonkers it is that you just get to talk to really smart people and learn
Yeah.
yourself. It's like the greatest PD you could ever possibly have. Let's talk about why then. Why do you love your job?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Um, so, I mean, I love the education space. I've always been driven by a social purpose, which I think many educators do, right? I've never really been driven that idea of a business or like being my main motive is to make some money or something like that. Like it's never really, I've always found people like that to be very different on a very different wavelength to me and always struggled with that. Whereas I think, well, we know there is such a social good purpose in the pursuit of good quality education. And there's no doubt that that is just a huge, huge driver for me. I think it's funny, like you could say, well, you've left the classroom. Like I've not been in the classroom for a while now, and I work as a teacher educator, if you like. That's kind of who I work with, leaders and teachers. But I think that I also just really get a kick out of seeing good schools or good people be able to do really good work, and if I'm
Yeah,
able to support that, that's just a great feeling. I mean, you've got a similar position, Chris. It's a
yeah.
real buzz, isn't it?
It is, and I think we're probably the same in that the thought that your impact is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This idea that you work with a leader who then works with 50 other leaders, who then work with
Mm.
100 teachers, who then work with 2,000 students. Suddenly, you do the maths, and one session from you has a rippling effect across untold amount of people. Um, so let's think about how then. How does a typical week look?
Oh, okay, manic at the minute. So absolute manic for me, and I say manic in a way that it's a little bit all over the place. So I work for myself currently, Chris. So all of my work is independently with different schools and different organizations, and that means I'm my own boss, which is that's a nightmare for me because
Yeah.
I'm just not very good at managing myself and my own time. I feel like I'd developed all these skills in leadership, in leading a team and empowering a team to lead for themselves. And that's a lot of the work I do. And all of a sudden now I'm on my own without a team, and I'm having to do all my own stuff. And so it's absolutely manic. But on a general week, if I was to look at this past week, yesterday I was in a school delivering some training all day. I'm usually then on quite a few calls, working in international education. I work with a lot of schools across Asia.
Cool.
So although it's nice to visit them, and I get to visit fairly often, a lot of the work is remote. So kind of checking in, doing coaching work, this kind of thing, kind of checking in online with the schools and organizations that I support.
Yeah, nice. And it's funny you say that, because I remember, moving out of the classroom and moving more into a central role and having more independence, and then thinking, like, where are the bells? Like, who tells me where to go? And like, what? It's like, you have to do that yourself now. It's like, oh goodness. And I'm still terrible. I mean, but anyone who knows me, I'm really like, oh, that's shiny. Oh, I'm going to go and think about that and work on that. And it's kind of,
Chris, we're very alike in that
I'd be a
regard, and it's not the
terrible,
best.
people
It's
say
not the
about,
best when you need to get something done.
yeah, well, no, I said I'd be a terrible head teacher, because just, the bins would never get filled, the bins would never get emptied, the catering contracts would never get signed. So if you've been to the podcast before, you'll know that we've got a kind of a structure for this conversation. It's punctuated by various different things, and Shane's done his kind of selections beforehand, and so we'll get started with the first kind of what we call a fast friends question. So these questions are there to, as quickly as possibly build connection between people. And Shane had a choice of different questions to choose from ahead of time. And this was the first one. Wow. This is a deep one. I'm absolutely cannot wait to hear the story. So Shane, if you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be?
Do you know, Chris, I felt they were all deep questions that you put on there anyway. I felt like, whoa, crikey, this really got me thinking. And then I thought, right, okay, which one do I pick? So this one stood out, and I'm going to kind of take a bit of a broader approach. And I'm going to caveat with one thing, in that I'm not, I think one of my strengths is that I'm not a very regretful person. So like, I'm lucky to not live in too many regrets, and that doesn't mean that I've not lived through challenges, but certainly like regret doesn't sit with me very well. But this one made me reflect, and it made me reflect on growing up and my school experience, actually, Chris, which I think is quite relevant. So I'm taking the being kind of raised by my whole community approach,
Nice.
and leaning into school. I mean, my parents are just wonderful. So, but in my school, I was in. I'm from a working class area, northeast of England. Fairly quite a deprived area of the country. I went to a school that had pretty low attainment. I mean, we were like kind of 20% A's to C's was
Wow.
kind of around where it was at the time. This was, a school that was struggling academically, in that sense. And so when I was at school, I went through, and I was a top achiever. I think I was pretty much top of the class in most things I did. But I was always top of the class, notably with a B, a solid B. Not top of the class with an A or an A star, always a solid B. And but because I was kind of the top set, kind of top student kind of mentality, I didn't really get pushed that hard. In that everyone was like, Shane, you're fine, you're at the top. Like you don't need to worry. So although I worked hard at school, I don't think I was ever pushed. Now, what's interesting, when I did my GCSEs, the two subjects where I got a straight B. By the way, Chris, I'm a straight B throughout my life. I'm B, 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 A levels, B, 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 university 2121. Everything is always second from the top. That is just
Right.
and I'm a middle child, so it just
Yeah.
all kind of comes together. But I did get two A's in two subjects, in music and in graphic design at GCSE, which I remember. And there was a reason I did, and I know it very clear. Those two teachers had very high expectations of me. A B
Yeah.
wasn't good enough for them, and they had that ambitious, and they kind of flooded me with that ambition, and it really helped me to excel. And I do believe that, not to arrogant way. My brain functions fairly well. I think I could have gotten a few more A's. I think I
Yeah.
could have been pushed that further. So when I think about kind of changing things about my childhood, I often come back to that. I think, gosh, I wish I'd have been pushed as hard as I had in music and graphic design in my other subjects. And I wonder if I'd have been pushed that way, whether that would have really helped me out in the future.
Yeah. That's fascinating, and echoes with a lot of my upbringing around, and we talked offline just before we got started about now I've got, a circle of peers, yourself included, who do believe in me more than I probably believe in myself and push me and challenge me and all that sort of stuff, which is fascinating. Well, if you're a B student, I was a D student all the way through, so I would have been envious of you. Brilliant. Well, the next thing that we've asked Shane to talk about, is what we would call an ignition point. And again, for those that are new to the podcast, this idea that as we go through our lives, there are probably events that change us, dramatically. That afterwards we are transformed. And what we want to focus on is the positives. How were you demonstrably better than this? And so Shane's going to basically talk about what he was like before this ignition point, what the ignition point was, and then how he was different afterwards. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I love this. I love this this question and this provocation to get you thinking. So I definitely reflect it's a career point was my first middle leadership position. Or, I mean, I was a coordinator for a little while, but first really substantial middle leadership position where I was the head of English as additional language at a school, at an international school. So before that, I'd had some leadership experience, just kind of on quite soft. And then this was kind of all of a sudden, I had a team. I had a team of, at the time, there were eight people reporting into me into this
Wow.
English. It's quite a big school. This was
Yeah.
just a primary AL, so it's a big primary school with a high AL demographic. And so I had this team. And the thing that was a little bit strange is when I went into the position, Chris, someone said, "Oh, good luck, Shane. You've really got quite a team there. There's all sorts of characters," they said,
Yeah.
in that team. And I thought, I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. And I knew these people. Well, I mean, I quickly learned what they meant by that is that I probably had the most diverse team in the school in terms of experience level. I had some teachers who had been teaching, 20 years, vastly more experienced than me, had been in leadership positions before. They were on my team. I had some teachers who had not got teaching qualification yet and were working kind of their way up to it. I had characters who were, quite unusual characters. I had some people who had quite high tempers. I had this one guy who was just wonderfully creative, but, could have the tendency to rub some people up the wrong way as well. There was this really diverse team. And I remember someone was saying to me, maybe, Shane, you need to take quite an authoritative stance. I'd done a bit of the middle leadership training, so I looked at the leadership styles, and they said maybe that's kind of what you need for this team. They need a bit of sorting. And didn't quite sit well with me. And I was a new leader, so I was naive. But I took a little bit of a different approach. I'd say I'm a people person, and so I just decided to try get to know each of them well. And we went through a bit of a journey together where we started to co-create what the department would look like on a different level than it had been done before. So we actually kind of ripped up the whole program and started again. But the way I started, I think because I was a young leader as well, was what can my team do rather than what do I think we should do. So I didn't just get my books out and what the team do. And I had the year one EL teacher, for example. He was incredibly creative, but liked his structures in the lesson, liked the way he did things in that way. Now I remember thinking I could try to restrict him into this particular textbook we were following at the minute, or I could kind of just go with it, go
Yeah.
with what his strength is, and try to support him to be the best he could in that situation. And that whole journey, and I did that for 4 years. That whole journey was just amazing for me, and I was very proud that actually over time we ended up really shifting the numbers of students who were going right through the proficiency scale, faster than they'd ever been.
Yeah.
And the team were just really excelling. And it wasn't without drama, but I guess I took my position as just to manage the drama rather than to manage the team, and
Sure.
did a lot of that kind of work. And that, for sure, as an ignition point, set me off on the path where I am today. That kind of gave me a bit of confidence to go, do you know what? I think there's something in this. I think I'm glad I didn't listen to that initial advice to be really authoritative with my team. I'm really glad I lent into them, because these are beautiful people who I keep in touch with still today, who
Right.
have many might find difficult to manage, and I just found an absolute privilege to work with. And I've utilized that mindset ever since, I think, in my different roles when I went into senior leadership, into executive leadership on a regional level, and now as an independent as well. I think it's really important.
That's really great, and it makes me think of that phrase, kind of authentic leadership, in that you didn't kind of follow a textbook approach. You had the strength and the belief to think, what do I believe and what do I want to be as a leader, and then that paid off.
Yeah, I think so. And look, it certainly wasn't just me thinking that. I was very lucky that the leader I had at the time was a coaching style leader. Like, he was the person who introduced me to the concept of coaching. So he was very much just invested in, Shane, you try this, experiment, come back to me, tell me what happened. What did you find there? So that gave me an environment to be my best self, if you like. It wasn't just that I was able, because I know a lot of middle leaders will go, well, it sounds great for you, Shane, but I don't have that level of autonomy and agency, right?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Wow, yeah, we could talk about that all day. Well, the next thing that, again, if you're new to the podcast, is that what I ask guests to do is to select a couple of launch pads from the Leadership Launchpads book. And Shane has selected this one. And so what we'll do is I'll kind of, I guess, do a little bit of talking through it, and then we'll see why it resonated with him. And so you've selected this idea of psychological safety. And if this is new to people, there's a suggestion in the literature that a lack of this safety kind of robs organizations of like fresh perspectives, ideas, and the truth. And if you've engaged with any of Amy Edmondson's kind of work, there's this feeling that, when you have a strong level of psychological safety, people are much more confident, and they feel safe to kind of raise issues, to disagree with people, to give people feedback. And then when they're not sure, to ask for clarification. And it makes me laugh always. I'm now super psychologically safe to ask about acronyms. Whenever I go into meetings and stuff, if somebody says a new acronym, I go, excuse me, I don't know what that means. Whereas in the past, I would just kind of like nod and then quickly Google it in the break or something. The literature goes on to sort of suggest there's some other things that people feel more confident to do, and that's to ask difficult questions. Really importantly for people like me and Shane and anyone else involved in professional development, that these people feel safe enough to ask for help. And of course, I'm sure we'll get onto this, but as leaders, I think that's increasingly hard to do. And the higher up you go, maybe the more kind of, predisposed you are to not ask for help. And then you've got solutions and admit errors. And they talk about this idea that, people can move through different roles as well. So you can, when you first start off, potentially you are happy to be a partner, and as you get more and more confident or more and more safe, you suddenly start to be a learner, a contributor, and that top level of people feeling like they can actually challenge each other within an organization. And then the final bit, I guess, of the launchpad and the literature is about, okay, so if you're a leader and you work in an organization where you don't feel like there's enough psychological safety, what can you do? And there's lots of things. I mean, I think one of the things is to give people a sense of why it's important. You know, if people recognize, oh, okay, yeah, if we all do this, then we'll be more innovative and honest and, productive. This idea of fallibility, I mean, if you're anything like me, you don't have to search hard for things you've done wrong, and mistakes you've made, but feeling
Likewise.
feeling confident to share those and to admit that you haven't quite got it all right and that you're tentative in your thinking is basically role modeling. You are allowing other people to join in with that. And you get this idea of normalizing feedback. And if you're looking at this, you'll be reading on ahead. That idea of not all conflict is negative. A lot of times, when A clashes with B, it produces C, and C is better than, either A or B. And of course, facilitating all voices, making sure that, if you run a team like Shane was talking about, that, you proactively bring people in and make sure that they feel heard and belonging and all that sort of stuff. And then there's that simple thing around rewarding people for the behaviors that you want. So, when you get people who are honest, and they challenge you, or they bravely put their hand up and share an idea, that you go ahead and you recognize and reward that, because you're much more likely to get a repeat of that stuff. So Shane, tell us a little bit about why this resonated with you.
Well, I guess it links to what we were talking about before. I feel really strongly that I've benefited from psychologically safe environments when I've been in them. And I felt that one thing that when I've had my biggest success is when I've hopefully tried to facilitate a psychologically safe environment for the teams that I've had. So I just loved it. And by the way, for people who are watching, I've got the book in front of me. I just absolutely love
one person to buy it. We're heading on Mum.
There we go. I'm your China representative now.
There you go.
I hope you know. This is great. So, yeah, and I love the way you referenced Amy Edmondson. So Amy Edmondson is like in fact, look, I got, right in front of me two of her books, like Fearless Organizations and Right Kind of Wrong. I mean, great title, Right Kind of Wrong, just Amazing. Says it all, doesn't it? I do think that I agree with a lot of her work that the best organizations just manage to make it a place where you can fail really well, you can fail safely, that it's a part of it. And it's funny, you mentioned about about asking for help as well. And I think you're right. When you become a leader, the tendency can be to think, I can't ask for help, or certainly I can't say, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. And yet there's great strength in that. And I think you always should reflect. If you ever say, I don't know, and there's a negative reaction, that's not you. Yeah. That's the receiver, like who's got the challenge there. That's not you. So I really love this concept. And for me, it links really well to standards. So, and it's one little graphic that I use a lot in training, which was from Amy Edmondson, where she talks a lot about standards and psychological safety. So if you kind of think of a quadrant, and you kind of put from the bottom, you've got at the bottom low psychological safety to high psychological safety, and then from left to right, low standards to high standards, like you've got low standards. So if you've got kind of low psychological safety and low standards, that's no one feels safe. I've been in these schools, by the way, where they don't really have much standards, but people get picked on for the littlest things. Well, people check out of those places. But if you're in a low psychological safety place and high standards, which happens a lot and is happening a lot in schools around the world, this high accountability culture, low psychological safety, what happens? What do teachers do? What do teams do? They avoid risk at all costs. Yeah. And if they fail, they need to cover it up. Yeah. And this is kind of really stuck to me. But if you kind of go to the upper end of the quadrant, if you've got low standards, high psychological safety, I go to some of these schools as well, where they don't really expect too much, but it's nicey nice. What happens? Everyone just enjoys the status quo. They just kind of get on with it. And actually what we're looking for is high standards with high accountability. And that Amy Edmondson doesn't just say everyone's doing great. She says everyone is failing well.
Yeah.
Everyone's failing, and everyone's
Yeah.
failing really well and learning from it. I just love that.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And when I read her stuff, and she talks about like how many great ideas have we lost out on because people weren't safe enough to share them.
Yes.
How much longer has change taken because we've continued with a path of action where actually the people who were enacting it didn't believe in it because they didn't feel safe enough to kind of say, when that classic thing,
Yeah.
and I've been in these meetings, I'm sure everyone has, where the leader is kind of putting forward an idea, they ask for feedback and say, what do you think? And everyone sort of nods. They leave the room and then everyone says, cool, well, that'll never work, will it? And
Yeah.
that kind of awkward thing where they just didn't feel safe to say that there and then.
Yeah. I've been
Crazy.
told by leaders that I've been worked in these organizations and told when I've been kind of chatting or coaching, and they've said, Shane, I know it doesn't make sense what we're doing. I know it's not right, but we just have to, we just have to do it. We just have to do it. And you'll often find in these environments, leaders will say this kind of classic thing of, it's just short term, it's just for now. We're in a really difficult time. This is a real challenge period. We just need to get through this. There's always the kind of hope that in 6 months, in a year, things will be different. And you know what? In those environments, they never change.
No, scary. Great. Well, let's keep cracking on because I want to hear a bit more about you. And so this is the next question, the Fast Friends question
Okay.
that Shane selected. What's your most treasured memory?
Okay. Well, this is obviously I've got a lot of wonderfully treasured memories, but I think one sticks to mind. I mean, I live internationally, so I've got kind of an international kind of feel and love the kind of the world and exploring. So definitely a big treasured memory is me and my wife, we went in 2012 to India. We were in India for 4 months. Something that actually kind of inspired, that was 2012 when we started our international journey as well. And in that time, just getting to go to a country that was so different to ours, and to go through an experience where we really went through culture shock. I mean, I was a boy from Scunthorpe in the UK, who used to holiday in Benidorm. My wife, she's an adventurous. She's the reason we're out here, Chris. And so I'm there in India, absolutely feeling absolutely sick because I'd eaten the wrong thing and drank the wrong thing, and really struggling, not finding the culture just very heavy, very noisy, really struggling. So I had this real shock, and we ended up at the beginning feeling so scared, and I was really fearful. I remember vividly, even just going to buy a train ticket one day and feeling like I was being hassled and feeling like I was going to lose all my money. I was fearful, really deeply fearful, and we nearly left, and we just decided to kind of stick around, and then had this journey and kind of got through it and started to see things in a different way. And that is a real treasured memory for me because it's something that set us out on a slightly different path. A lot of people now ask us, why China? Why do you live in China? And I often say now, and my wife says the same, well, the thing about China is it's one of the most important countries in the world. You can't argue that. But B, it's probably one of the most misunderstood. Most people have an opinion on China. Most people know very little about it. So what a privilege to live here, to meet the people, to live with the people, and to try and understand a little bit better. And it was definitely our trip to India that really set that off. And I feel very, very protective of that memory, if you can feel such a thing.
Yeah, what a great kind of fork in the road, for your life. That if you'd given up at that point and said, "This is not for me," who knows where that would be now? Yeah, God,
yeah, that's right. Great. It would have been life changing, literally.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get back into some more of Shane's life now with the second kind of ignition point, and the same format as before, really. Tell us a bit about what you were like before this event, what the event was, and then how it changed you.
So this was this event was something a bit more recent. So just a couple of years ago now, I'd like to kind of reflect on when I left my last kind of full-time job. And when I say left, was made redundant from the job. They downsized the team, so it was a redundancy. And that has all the huge kind of emotional impact that you would imagine out of a redundancy, and all that kind of imposter syndrome in the field, and all of this kind of this stuff. Also, the excitement that comes from it of the thinking, oh, can leave. I've got an opportunity to do something here.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would class it as a real inflection moment. Sharath Jivan talks about this as inflection moments, and this was a real inflection point for me, in that I'd worked for the system for all of my career, like inside the system, and all of a sudden, and I had the opportunity to just take a step. I guess I was getting higher up the system and more broader role, right? I was in a systems level position, still within the system, and then I had this opportunity to just kind of take a step back and look from the outside, and it was quite liberating in a number of ways to make that leap. One was that I realized that I'd never been able to define my own professional value system properly. I'd never taken the time to really do that work for myself, because it had always been a negotiation between my value and the organization's values, and we'd come to an agreement, and it would be a long-term agreement. I was with my last organization for 8 years. So that was a long-term agreement, that we had. And so this was quite a liberating idea to step outside. But also it was a big opportunity for me, because if I was to chart the journey of kind of my career as a leader, it was constantly negotiating that tension of what do I tell and how do I use my knowledge? Surely I've got knowledge here, and that's it. That's important. And what do I facilitate with my teams and the people who are working? And where are decisions best made locally, regionally, nationally, at system level, local level, and what kind of different? And this was always a negotiation for me. And I was able to kind of step back and imagine, I think at this inflection moment, what would it be like if we tried to make every decision locally, supported by the system? And that's been that's really energized me, and has definitely propelled me up through the last 2 years, and is through a lot of the work I'm doing as co-founder of Work Collaborative with a wonderful colleague, Ephraim Lerner, around collaborative work. It's in the name, and what that means to have true local leadership that is truly supported by the systems around it, rather than what we see, sadly, the UK, we know, challenges with Ofsted, the inspectorate, the different things, like how we have still not worked out that interaction between system and local. It's still being negotiated. It's still quite a messy space. I think there's a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it feels like, now you describe that, it's almost kind of what would be seen on the surface as quite a negative event, then led to something positive.
Very much so. Very much so.
Do you remember how long did it feel like a negative? Did it take you long to find the positive in it?
So look, Chris, I'm a little bit of an annoying optimist. So just to put my hands up, like it really winds my wife up. Like it's, so I did on the first day, I do remember I got the news. My line manager sat down with me, basically said, Shane, hey, you're not going to have a job at the end of the month. Right. And I remember saying to her, okay, I just need to go home now and think about this. And on the way home, I grabbed some A3 paper out of the photocopier and a couple of board markers, and just kind of went home, because I knew what I needed to do. I needed to get everything down on paper, and I created my little mini plan of action from there. So I didn't really sit too bad. I think for me, where it comes is that recurring imposter syndrome that just hits you, doesn't it? It just drops unexpected. And I'm in a constant cycle with this. I still feel it, all the time now. I feel it jumping on a call with you, Chris. You're just a really knowledgeable person doing wonderful things, and I instantly feel like, I shouldn't be in this space. Like, what on earth are you doing talking to me? So it's more of something that I'm constantly having to negotiate, and that sometimes links to that redundancy, perhaps. But it was never really a big. I didn't really go through the big traditional slump of I'm just going to sit in my pants at home and watch, box sets and not do anything. Like I
Mm.
didn't do that. I should have
No,
probably. It
maybe,
sounds fun.
yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that spring to mind. That idea that, in most cases, inactivity is not going to solve things, is it? Like,
Hmm.
you've got to do something. You've got to move a little bit forward. Yeah, God, interesting stuff. Um, so the next thing that I guess we're going to have a look at another launch pad, and this one is
Yeah.
particularly. I was excited when Shane picked this one because he's the reason for it even existing. And to give you a bit of an insight about how these things come about, typically what happens is I read or listen to smarter people than myself, hear a word that my poor educational background means I don't understand, and then I go and find out about it. And so a while back, Shane put this phrase on, I think it was LinkedIn maybe at the time, um,
Yeah.
about iatrogenic effects. And actually, we'll probably approach this one in a slightly different because, yeah, we'll put this slogan up, this idea that sometimes our best intentions lead to unexpected harm and ineffectiveness. But I'll let you lead on this one, Shane. Where did you come up? Where did you hear about this?
So yeah, I just love this word, and it helped me to kind of frame something that I thought about a lot and and never really had a word to describe it as such. But I was doing a course with the Common Cause Foundation, who, if you haven't heard of, Chris, they're a wonderful organization all about values and about what values are. Do some really brilliant work. And I was on their kind of Values 101 course. I was just really, really fascinating work. And they were talking about, they brought up this word, iatrogenic effects, which
Mm,
has come from the medicine world. It's come from the
right.
world of medicine, and it's as simple as the something having an unintended effect, taking that new drug, and it having the benefit, but then it has a side effect, if you like,
Right.
something else, some unexpected harm. Um, but yeah, that's where I came across it. It was, from Common Cause, and I just shared it online. I remember, and you were like, "Oh, this sounds good." And I think you made it within a day or something.
I was
Like it was
so
pretty,
excited about it
you
when I
were
saw it,
right.
and I thought, "Oh my goodness!" And I think that's the joy of it. These things just resonate, and you think, "Oh my God, there's a word for the thing that I've been thinking about." Like, who. Um, but yeah, and we then kicked around a few ideas, and I'll put them up
Mm,
on the screen, and then we can talk about some of the extra ones you've thought about. I mean, the things that
yes.
came to mind. The first one, this idea of you may think that it's great to have really high expectations, and that no harm can come from that. Um, but again, this idea of if you are enforcing extremely high expectations, then you can actually create a culture of fear, which then
Mm,
stops people innovating, and they start filtering things because they don't want to take the risk of not meeting kind of those high expectations. A bit like we talked earlier. Um, the other one that came to mind was this idea of kind of I work in a lot of schools who the mindset of the SLT is to evaluate, to check, to measure, to see if it's working and all that stuff. And I remember, and Ofsted's a good example, I suppose, in that that idea of an Ofsted evaluation meaning lots of things can also kind of push people into just performing to pass the test.
yeah.
I mean, I joke about how I was a master of the Ofsted game. I knew exactly what they wanted and I knew exactly how to play the game. And so, when they came to visit our schools, I was always like top dog because I knew it was all about, jazz hands, kids moving around the room, lots of engagement. And of course we know that's now not, it's probably a poor proxy for learning, ironically,
Mm,
that,
mm,
kids are busy, teacher gets through his lesson. So that's an interesting one. I sort of thought about this as well, this idea of, we're desperate to help people. It makes us feel good, it makes them feel good. And there's a danger in there, especially now that, rightly so, well-being is really high on the agenda, that we inadvertently kind of strip people of their expertise by helping them too much. You know, we take a lot of their thinking away from them. And me and you are, you know, deeply into the coaching scene, and I think you see it a lot here. You know, this idea that really what coaching is a safe space for the other person to think. And if at any point that person's not doing the lion's share of the thinking, it's probably not as helpful as it could be. And the last one I sort of came up with was that idea, and I'm slightly victim to this, I suppose, in that it may feel, you know, seductive to just keep taking career jumps, you know, and you know, if you lean up, put your head above the parapet and work hard, that stuff comes to you. And I remember as a young teacher, you know, being given lots of additional opportunities and promotions and all that. And I'm thinking, yeah, great. But effectively what I was doing is I was moving much quicker than my expertise could move. And so then found myself in positions where I didn't have the knowledge, the skills and the experience to actually be effective, but then also not the psychological safety to ask for help. And then by that point, you know, not the financial security to kind of, you know, take a drop back. And then when we talked about this, you had a few others in mind, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I think these examples are really perfect examples. I think, you know, since we spoke, you know, that time ago, you know, I've thought a lot about these effects and done some work with schools on thinking about iatrogenic effects. In that there are different types of iatrogenic effects as well, in that some are going to be effects that are absolute, this is going to happen, this negative action will happen because of this result. So the decision you make is going to have that effect whether you like it or not. So you've just got to make sure, is the positives, do they outweigh the negatives? So there's that kind of decision. That's a classic leadership decision.
Yeah.
And then there's the other type, whereas this is likely to have an effect, but it can be mitigated in some way if you think and do some careful planning. Now, they are two very different scenarios and would take two very different approaches. Our challenge is really identifying as leaders which iatrogenic effects are those ones that are going to have something that we can do something about, and which ones are not. Because a leader will often have this kind of optimism bias, a bias to think, I think we can manage this.
Yeah.
I think we can manage this. This thing is so good. I think the effects, the iatrogenic effects, can be managed. It's classic optimist leadership mindset, and we all have it because we want our thing to succeed.
Yeah.
And the problem is sometimes we can be taking on an approach where if we were to have had an objective view, we would have known there was no way we could avoid that negative effect. And therefore, our decision would be different. It would be about being in honest conversation with our staff about the things that we're going to lose by taking on this thing, so that there are no shocks, rather than trying to trick staff into thinking, do you know what, we'll be okay. It's going to work itself out, because that really rubs people up the wrong way.
Absolutely. And I think the last thing that, you know, that crossed my mind when I was making this one was this idea that, you know, an awareness and potentially mitigation needs to be part of that planning process, that it's almost like a standing agenda item. So you're aware that there's always going to be some sort of negativity attached, and then it's just a rationalized decision on whether it's worth the thing. Amazing. Well, we're coming to kind of the end now, which is sad for me, but we're going to go into the final kind of fast friends question, and this one's a big one. And you know, I mean, I'll read it out for those listening, but Shane's chosen this question: if you were to die this evening with no opportunity to communicate with anyone, what would you most regret not having told someone, and then why haven't you told them yet? Wow.
Yeah, Chris. Well, you put 4 questions, and I was a little bit looking at the questions, and I thought there was another one that I thought I could make a more easy answer, but I just was drawn to this. I love provocative questions, and this is nothing if not that. And I love questions that induce a bit of vulnerability. You know, I think, you know, I'm in the public sphere a fair bit on social media with the podcast, a few different areas that I kind of putting things out in public, right? Just like yourself. And that takes a degree of vulnerability. So our tendency can be to keep things professional, right? Just to keep things professional. and to not really share about how we're feeling. I think that's hugely damaging, and I think it's particularly damaging for men, Chris. That this
Yeah.
idea that we're not sharing enough. So I had to kind of go with this question. For me, it wouldn't be telling someone, it would be telling a few people. And I think the thing that I would want to be saying more than I do at the minute is acknowledgement and thanking of the people whose shoulders I stand on. And it sounds like something that I could maybe do a lot. And I think we can all do it sometimes in kind of platitudes, but not really thinking it. To go back to kind of where I've come from, working class background, kind of worked hard, had to work hard for a lot of what, I got, was the first person in my family to go to sixth form college, first person to go to university, kind of going to kind of, across the classes, if you like, into the middle class life or whatever. And very much have felt an outsider in lots of ways in kind of at my university and in places like that. So I've always had a tendency to, I guess, to protect myself, to go, do you know what, Shane? Always remember how hard you work, and that's what's paying off, right? So remember how hard you've worked, Shane, and this is because of you, and really be proud of what you've achieved. But I think sometimes, if I was to really be vulnerable and reflect, I think sometimes that can, sometimes, that defensiveness to think I've worked really hard, and I do work hard, Chris, and probably, I work very hard at what I do and very passionate, but that doesn't mean that I'm not literally standing on the shoulders of giants, and that the people around me are literally have kind of facilitated this whole journey, and it has been a genuine partnership. And I think I would really like to, if I was kind of thinking about this question, I would really like to make sure I approach each of those people regularly, just to say thank you and to tell them what I'm thankful for and why they've had such an impact. I think that's so important. And for me, very personally, kind of helps me to kind of battle that constant battle with ego that you can have, like sometimes when you're kind of in a leadership career or in this kind of field in the public space as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, like everything we seem to talk about, it resonates with me around, people that have, a family and that have imbued us with characteristics that somehow have got us to where we are today. And I think there's an interesting segue into leadership around, I'm not sure. There's another launchpad called the paradox of praise. This idea that it's simple to give praise, but then why aren't people doing it more? And I'm sure we can all, can't we? I could recall numerous times when I've had a simple email from a leader above me saying thank you, and that being literally life changing for me in terms of confidence and belonging and all that. And I think we should probably, as leaders, recognize the impact that saying thank you and all that can have on other people. Yeah.
Very
And I guess
much.
it's something that we should probably, for those that are listening, is to think about, who could you, after you finish listening to this, just call up or send an email or knock on someone's door and say, thanks. And yeah, interesting stuff.
You've certainly inspired me to do that, Chris, with that question. So yeah, I picked a bit of a dark, difficult question, but
Let's do it.
yeah, it's really helped me. And that's the power of questions, right? They get you thinking in a slightly
Yeah.
different way.
And this is why we need to surround ourselves with as many people like that as we can. Amazing. Well, the last thing to say really is just, thanks. It's always a joy. I know, we pat ourselves each other on the back, but we hope that, people that have been listening have got as much out of this. In terms of places to kind of, connect with you, Shane, anywhere else from that?
Yeah. LinkedIn, Blue Sky. Oh my God, X, Chris. I'm not on there very much anymore, but
No,
yeah,
I think,
I don't take the account down, but like I'm
no,
just having that kind of. I went on there yesterday for a few minutes and got angry very quickly,
I
and just
think,
find myself just Shane, get off. What
yeah,
are you doing?
I know exactly what you were. I think most of us are in the same situation, yeah, and hopefully, yeah, we can build a better space, potentially over on Blue Sky, and of course LinkedIn's a standard. So yeah, so
Yeah.
definitely get in contact Shane if you've got anything you want to get involved in with what he's working with. If you're interested in any of the Leadership Launchpad stuff, you can scan the QR code and get the book, or contact me on any of the socials. And so thanks again, Shane, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks so much, Chris.